What's going on with Danielle Hunter? Some talk about how Kirk Cousins did, some talk about Christian Darrisaw. We got a lot to go into on this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for my listeners. Get 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. If you have a Fire Stick or a Roku, Amazon Fire Stick or Roku, you can get the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Locked On Minnesota, that's my show. That's Locked On Minnesota Sports, the feed with like Football Party and Ron Johnson Show and Superior Sports Talk. Twins, Wild starting up. Basketball's getting going, so the Wolves are starting up. Gophers, of course. All of those on one feed on Amazon Fire Stick or Roku. You can just download the app, which is right there on your smart TV. Really cool stuff. Go check that out. I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also join me on Patreon at patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL if you want some more in-depth film content. That is a lot of what we're going to do today. And most of the things I'm going to talk about today, I am going over on Patreon, definitely going over Darrisaw and a couple of these Kirk Cousins things. I either have an article or a Patreon post planned. Maybe the Danielle Hunter thing, but let's start with the Danielle Hunter thing. That is a question that I have gotten a lot. That is a thing that has shown up quite a bit. Where in the world is Danielle? What's up with Danielle Hunter? Is he bad? Is he not healthy? Is he... is it scheme? Is it Donatello's fault? What's the deal, right? And so I kind of set out to answer, all right, what's going on here? Is he secretly doing fine and we're just not noticing? And there is a germ of all of it. But I think right now we aren't getting what we usually would expect to get out of Danielle Hunter. Like, I think we can kind of safely say that. I don't think he's playing poorly by any stretch of the imagination. He is still playing very well. He's still a positive influence on the defense, but just less of one than usual. That's, I guess, where I would put it. So it's not a, oh my God, he's suddenly bad or anything like that, right? Like it's just that we have really high expectations. He's Danielle Hunter. So it's not bad, but it is worse than usual. So what's the deal with that? I think for me, the one that is standing out the most, like the thing that stands out the most is like, he's not like a bad player all of a sudden. And I don't think we have to like be concerned about if we don't have the Danielle Hunter we know and love anymore. And Ed Donatel was asked about this and he said, yeah, I see this every time somebody's got to adjust to this scheme. It's totally normal. No concern. And I agree with him. I'm willing to take him at his word, I guess is a better way to put that. There's a couple of things that Danielle Hunter is doing differently in his pass rushes that I think is causing him to not be nearly as explosive. And he's getting a lot of attention. And those things are combining to make it really hard for him to get home. Setting up a lot of one-on-ones for other people, getting a lot of opportunities for guys like Zadarius Smith, or DJ Wanham has had a much better season. And part of that is having those opportunities. Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips getting in the backfield some too. A lot of that is credit to just the attention that Danielle Hunter garners. But there is definitely a step back to especially in the pass rush. There are a lot of reps where he doesn't quite look as explosive as he usually does. And for me, the big reason for that is the stance from which he rushes. It is a 2-point stance. So mechanically, biomechanically, if you're a 4-3 end, and this is the way Griffin always was, this is the way Hunter was in the Zimmer 4-3, you were a 3-point stance. You had a hand in the dirt, and that means you were coiled up. and just ready to explode into the guy. It was very quick. So if you were a tackle going up against Danielle Hunter, he would be in your pads immediately, and it made him really difficult to contend with. You had to do either a jump set or a very quick set. And from pass protection, your options were so much more limited that it was easier for Danielle Hunter to counter them. And Danielle Hunter is really, really elite at countering all of those things. And he still is. If you watch, when he gets to the engagement and he's got to do something with his hands or he's got to find a way to actually get past you, that resolves itself very, very quickly. And Danielle Hunter wins that a lot. It's just happening later in the play because he's rushing from a 2-point stance where he's not as explosive. He's not coming out the blocks as quickly and as explosive. He's not going crazy into you. And that lets a tackle, usually, set themselves up kind of however they want. And however long it takes him to beat that guy, now he's just that much later, and there's that much better of a chance that the ball is already gone. There's another thing posed by Arif Hassan in a couple places. We talked about it a little bit on the Minnesota Football Party, that he's rushing from a different lead leg. And that is just sort of a thing to get used to. Advantages and disadvantages of that, we don't need to get into like why he's from a different lead leg. It's just kind of how it's worked out. But it's different to get your feet and your hands in the right synchronization and to time all that stuff up correctly to be as like lethal as possible. Also not quite dialed in. And that is, I believe, what Ed Donatel is referring to when it's like there's stuff to get used to. I think that's the thing to get used to, is just that like mechanically. And that is something I do believe he can get used to and kind of get back to form. But that's, I believe, where he has been. But the other thing is he's getting a lot of attention. So not only is he not up to 100% of his full self because he's like learning new dance moves, if you will, but he's also getting chipped a whole bunch. He's getting doubled, not as much as you would think, but that's still part of it. He's getting the attention of like tertiary blockers, and those tertiary blockers are getting to him earlier in the play because of how much slower he's coming off the blocks, how much slower he's coming off the snap. A lot of times he's coming from further away, and the tackle he's going up against can fully get all the depth he wants and set all the way he wants and really be at an advantage. And there's a tight end giving him even more time to set up, right? It's like exactly what you would want from a chipping tight end. And it's just the position that he's being put in. I think eventually this pays off once Danielle Hunter can rush from that as well as he could rush from 4-3. And I do think that moment will come. And then he'll be just as lethal as he always was, with the added threat of maybe he backs off and drops into coverage. You just got to do that enough just to be able to mess with protections and stuff. But for now, it's not quite everything we always get. It's not a concern to me, but it is a problem, if that makes sense. It's not something I believe will persist forever and we suddenly have this like crappy washed player. I think it's a problem for now, and it is limiting, one of many things limiting the Vikings defense. But I don't think it lasts forever. I don't even know if it lasts throughout the rest of this season. And I'd be surprised to see it next season. That's where I'm at on this. But I want to switch around and talk about some things on offense, because the Vikings offense had itself a day. And there's a lot of cool stuff to go over and explain. Really cool football stuff to talk about. Now, a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is convenient, accessible, affordable, and entirely online therapy. To me, therapy is a maintenance action. I think there's still a stigma, especially if you're a little older, around therapy as this thing you go to if you're wrong. And if it could be this moral failing, right? This thing that you only need if you can't handle your problems on your own. And that's not what therapy is. To me, it's like going to the gym, but for your soul, for your mental health. And that's a really important thing to take care of. But when you try to get a therapist, it can not be a pretty bad match right off the bat. And a lot of people will go to a therapist, not like that therapist because they aren't what they're looking for. That happens all the time. And then think all therapy is like that. I don't like therapy. I'll never do it. But I strongly encourage you to try a whole bunch of people. That's what I had to do. I've been in therapy for a couple years now, and it's been fantastic. It's helped me with self-esteem and all sorts of other like mental issues that I had been dealing with my whole life and coping with my whole life that I didn't even realize I was doing. And finding the right person is a huge part of that. So if you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option because they can get you matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey. You can switch therapists at any time, free of cost. So when you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon. Once again, thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Let's talk about some offensive stuff. So it will not surprise you to learn that I have a very high opinion of the way that Kirk Cousins played in this game. Most people should. It's a very good game. There's a lot to like about it, making all the throws and stuff, and that's all fine. But I think a lot of plays were won before the snap. And that's really cool. The Bears, it wasn't hard to figure him out, but credit anyways for figuring them out defensively. They did not do a very good job at all of disguising their coverages. When they did disguise their coverages, sometimes they got caught. And I think Cousins found a lot of weak points and was able to identify exactly which play needs to happen to exploit those. In particular, the Bears ran a lot of single high, either cover 3 or cover 1. And the deal with that is it's really easy versus those coverages to get a one-on-one with whoever you want with a guy on the outside. If it's cover 3, the middle of the field is closed, so you're not getting as much up the seam, but there is one guy deep on the sideline and one guy shallow on the sideline. And so it's really easy to just run a deep route and a shallow route, and that's going to be 2 one-on-ones. Pick whichever one you want Justin Jefferson to be. Against cover 1, that's usually just man coverage across the board. They're just giving you the one-on-one, and because they're lining up with a single high safety pre-snap, they're not rotating it, they're not disguising it, they're just telling you, hey, we're in single high, come get. That is a big signal to Kirk Cousins. So you may have noticed in that game, and it's something that I talked about that I wanted to look deeper into, that Kirk Cousins was going up to the line, tempo up to the line. He'd call a play in code, basically, no huddle, get up to the line with like 20 seconds left, do a hard count or something, see how the defense responded, and then back off and either audible or don't. So he is choosing a play of sorts. He's probably choosing from a limited number of options, but he's choosing a play of sorts. The sneak at the end of the game that was the final touchdown, I believe, was also an option like this that Cousins had the option to kind of change into. What I noticed about a lot of these was it was either the front or the safety structure that he was looking at, depending on if he was checking into a run or a pass. But if he's checking into a pass, and I don't know what he was checking out of, it could be they had a run call with a pass stapled to it. It could be a pass with a different pass stapled to it. They could have a 2 high beater versus a 1 high beater, that kind of thing. Doesn't matter. What he checked into is what matters. And that was very often a 3 beater or like a single high beater of some sort. The Bears would put themselves in situations where they would have an extra man in the box. That's the point of single high, is that you can have a safety roaming around and do more with that safety. But it's going to be a lot of one-on-ones. Even in your zone coverages, there's a lot of ways to get that one-on-one. And that's what that tempo was. Really cool stuff. Get to the line, see single high. Oh my God, they're giving us single high? Okay, here's a flood concept. Now Justin Jefferson's on an intermediate crosser, and Jalen Jones or Kyler Gordon, rookies, have to carry Justin Jefferson all the way across the field, and they're never going to be able to do it. And that was a lot of the offensive production. And then the other thing was in the run game, that Kirk Cousins would see, depending on the front, he would be able to check into certain runs, I believe. I'm guessing a lot here, right? I don't know what the code is, but I know what they ran and I know what he saw pre-snap. And so I'm sort of putting two and two together, making an educated guess here. But the Vikings have seen a lot of underfronts this year, and that's to be expected with how often they run to the weak side. So let me explain what some of that is. So they love to run weak side away from the tight end, and an underfront is a 4-man front. When they see 4-3 defenses or nickel defenses, they live in 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers. That means you're going to get everyone's nickel defense. So whether it's a 3-4 or 4-3 across from you, that's usually going to be a 4-man surface against 11 personnel. Once you're in nickel, that's 4 defensive linemen, right? And that, so you're going to get, it all simplifies out, which makes everything really easy for your offensive line, makes things easier for your quarterback. Love it, right? That's kind of the purpose of going 11 personnel all the time. You don't get as much variability, but that's okay because this is clearly our best 5 skill players, right? So the Vikings get under or over fronts is going to be the 2 kind of most common fronts you get with that 4-man surface. And all that means, those both have the same, it's like what you would picture of a 4-3. You've got 2 defensive ends lining up outside the tackles, and then you have 2 defensive tackles on the inside, one in an A gap, one in a B gap, a 1 tech and a 3 tech. And where that 3 tech is, if he's on the weak side, it's an under front, and if he's on the strong side, it's an over front, and then the nose tackle's on the other side. Get it? All right. But visualize that, right? Visualize an under front. You have the nose tackle in the middle, right? He's on either side of the center. And then you have a 3 technique over on the weak side. So if you are anticipating that they will run to the weak side, which if you're playing the Vikings, you probably are, now you've got a 3 tech over there, and the nose tackle is not too much further away than he would have been anyways. And then if you think they're going to run to the strong side, you have the 3 tech over there, and the nose tackle not too much further over than you would think, right? So that's kind of the logic of why we're seeing a lot of underfronts. So in this scheme, you got to have something that punishes an underfront, because that's going to be a little better against our staple runs, our duos, and our outside zones that love to run to the weak side. A lot of those staples will depend on where the bubble is. The bubble is a word for whatever gap's not covered, essentially where the 3 tech isn't. If he's on the weak side, then the B gap on the strong side is where the bubble is, right? And so there's a lot of, hey, we've got this run packaged with this other play. And if you're going to check into this run, do it if it's going to run at that bubble, because there's no defensive lineman there. And you probably have somebody like Ezra Cleveland or Ed Ingram climbing directly up to a linebacker. That's a really favorable matchup, and let's go take advantage of it. You can get a lot of push that way. That happened a lot with run plays as well. But what you got to understand from a broader sense was the Bears didn't do a very good job of disguising what their defensive strategy was. They sort of played all their cards pre-snap. Kirk Cousins read those cards and chose a play from a number of options that countered that the best. And from there, it doesn't become about winning matchups anymore. It becomes about not screwing up. And that's so much easier. And so they could just drive all the way down the field. 8 possessions, 4 of them big, long touchdown drives. That's kind of how that happened. There's a couple other things I want to go over. Christian Darrisaw was super good. There's not a lot of nuance to that, but I also want to talk a little bit about a high-low thing that I've noticed. And I've got an article to that effect as well. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling. You can start betting on the Vikings-Dolphins game if you have a death wish. We don't know who's going to start at quarterback there, so I'd probably hold off. That's why I would lay a bet on that one at kickoff, depending on what you think is going to happen. And I'll probably, when I do previewing, which is going to be the rest of the week here, I'll probably have multiple picks depending on who plays at quarterback, right? They've got a whole bunch of injury stuff going on, and we don't know how it's going to work. But if you want to bet on that or bet on any other game, primetime games, Thursday Night Football, Commanders, Bears, I will be grambling on that game. It is the only way I can get through it. And you can bet on baseball playoffs and all sorts of other stuff as well at betonline.net. You can bet live. You can do player props, crazy parlays, all sorts of stuff. Once again, that's betonline.net, where the game starts. couple more odds and ends here I want to go over from the tape from this Bears game before we pretty much put it to bed. Christian Darrisaw. Wow. The offensive line in general was just incredible. The Bears have a pretty bad front four. Robert Quinn's the only like redeemable player, and he got destroyed by Christian Darrisaw. But they've got a lot. I mean, they got Armon Watts starting, which was something. I mean, he got beat up by Jonathan Bullard in camp here, like, and they've got him starting, and he's one of the players they're least mad at. That it's a rough place, and kicking their butts is what you would expect from a good unit. But it's good to see that because, you know, past offensive lines would have struggled against the worst defensive lines in the league, right? Bradbury's playing better. And a lot of that is, and I get that question a lot, is Bradbury, what's going on with that? He's getting better PFF grades. I don't think he's a different player at all, but I do think he's getting a lot more help. And a lot of that is coming from Christian Darrisaw. Darrisaw is playing super well, and he is being assigned a super difficult role where he's on an island more, he's widening out, and he's basically, I mean, he's got to play in open field against really agile guys in edge rushers. I want to see this happen. I'm curious to see how they go up against like an elite edge rusher. I don't know when the next time that is. Like Cowboys come to mind as that'll be a really interesting game. What do you do against Micah Parsons and or DeMarcus Lawrence, right? Will you still leave him on that island? If you can, if Darrisaw can keep up with those guys, look out, right? The advantage that creates is if you can keep him on an island, you can essentially always half slide the protection. And those words again, what do those mean? So usually a protection will have man-to-man on one side and then what I like to call a wall on the other side, where you have guys playing hip-to-hip, helping each other. So if you have a wall that's Bradbury, O'Neal, and Ed Ingram on that side, Ed Ingram has help to either side because those guys are hip-to-hip. If somebody wants to try to beat him to the inside, they're just going to run into Garrett Bradbury and whoever he's blocking. And vice versa. If someone wants to try to beat Bradbury outside, they're just going to run into Ingram. And if you want to slide the protection, that's adding more people to that wall, depending on the front. And there's a lot of guesswork in it. It's a subjective thing. But if you can basically take that wall and make it a 4-man wall with everybody but Christian Darrisaw, everybody's helping each other out. And that means everybody's job is a little bit easier. So everybody else is going to look a little bit better. And Darrisaw is the only one not getting help. Because he's so good, he can handle it anyways. It's huge. Plus, it changes the spacing a lot. And it gives Kirk Cousins more room to work inside the pocket if you can split Darrisaw way out wide. And, you know, if he can kind of play on that island, and if he doesn't cede any ground, which he rarely does, Cousins has now all that room to work with. So if something does go wrong on that wall, he can essentially work his, and this has happened a few times, work the pocket and just take a quick hitch to reset toward Christian Darrisaw, who's got his guy on lock, and erase someone else's pressure. So essentially, you can think of it as Kevin O'Connell is giving his toughest battles to his toughest soldiers. And no, that does not mean that I think Kevin O'Connell is actually Jesus. I don't think I should have to say that, but here we are. But because the degree of difficulty is so high for Darrisaw, it doesn't have to be as high for everybody else. That's the abstract version of the take, and it rules, and it's awesome, and we can be very, very happy about it. All the baby Trent Williams stuff bore out. Yep, he's really good. I feel like he's all of the like grading mechanisms call him like a top 5 tackle, and I'm hard pressed to argue with it. The way he's playing, at least this year, got to sustain it before you get the reputation. But we're talking Pro Bowl. We're starting to talk. What more does he need to do to be considered elite? And I think the answer to that question is keep it up. No notes, just keep doing it. One final thing, there's this high-low thing. So this happened for the last couple of games. Now that I've had a chance to go back and look at the Saints game, couldn't watch that. I was on vacation. I've watched that, and watching this game, a lot of the missed opportunities that Kirk Cousins has talked about in pressers have all been sort of the same problem in the reads. So they do a lot of high-low on a cornerback. Similar thing to what I described before. You have a cornerback on the sideline. You have a safety deep enough where it doesn't matter. So you can put that cornerback in conflict, run an intermediate route, run a short route, and make the corner declare one. But my opinion on this, I have a whole article that explains it and shows more examples if you are a visual learner. But my read on this is that he is throwing those quickly enough where the corner does not have to declare, where they can just midpoint between the two. And if he tries to throw deep, the corner's close enough to make a play. And if he tries to throw short, the corner's close enough to drive and make a tackle. And that needs to extend a little bit longer so that that corner has to declare his coverage. And I think that was a note that got into Kirk Cousins' head. And then he extended it too far, and that turned into the interception. And I say that because he said, that was letting previous plays sort of influence current plays and everything needs to be in more of a vacuum and all that stuff. So I think he was there were a lot of missed opportunities in the last couple games. He called out a bunch of them, and I explained the ones he called out in that article in particular, but a lot of them were that version of it where you're just rushing the process and you're not letting that high-low develop. You're not letting that stretch actually stretch. They're still too close to each other where the corner can still be responsible for both of them. And I think then he just tried to force the issue and just sort of took the deep route because he hasn't taken the deep route in a while, instead of actually reading what the coverage was, because in that particular one, the read was incredibly clear to go low. And he forced the issue. And that's previous mistakes kind of getting in your head. That's the only other thing. But you'd be hard pressed to call it Cousins struggling because of that after this game. He had an awesome game. He totally solved the Bears, and that more than makes up for throwing that interception, especially once you kind of after that next drive, after get the ball the next time, was that clutch 17 play drive with all the third down conversions, and a lot of clutchness in it. So give me a game like that and a game like the game against the Packers. If you can give me games like that, then I think, you can go places with Kirk Cousins. You just need to get it consistently. And so let's see what they can do against Miami. Tomorrow is Crossover Thursday. We'll talk to Locked On Dolphins. And then Friday we'll do our You Betcha. We'll do our bold predictions and all of that good stuff. So all very exciting. Time to kind of move on to the Miami Dolphins. Really weird game. Hard to know what to make of it. So I'm going to have a lot of questions. And I'm going to learn about the Dolphins kind of live because I don't have a great sense for them. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skull.